Hi and welcome to Hospitality Huddles. I'm Scot Turner and each episode we'll be uncovering the industry's biggest challenges and serving up the solutions to help overcome them. We're bringing together some of the best thought leaders in the industry and finding some of the most creative minds shaping the future of hospitality from all around the world. They're going to share insights tackling the pain points operators just like you face every day. Hospitality Huddles is more than a podcast, it's a community of passionate individuals who appreciate the art and science of hospitality and want to help answer the difficult questions. If you like the show, one of the best ways to support us is to hit that subscribe button and leave a review. It's only going to take a couple of minutes and it really does make the difference. So let's get on with today's episode, and all that's left to say is welcome to Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation, one huddle at a time. So on this week's episode of Hospitality Huddles, we have Owen Ward, who's got a great experience in wine. And I think especially coming into the time of year that we are, there's some great tips to be had from this. So Owen, thanks for joining us. And we always kick off with the same question for everyone, which is, what does hospitality mean to you? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, pleasure. No, thanks for arranging. It's good to speak about it, and hopefully we can come up with a few helpful wine tips for your listeners, for your subscribers. Hospitality. I mean, what does hospitality mean? I think, funnily enough, in terms of pub, restaurant, hotel hospitality, I think I had a really good summary of it just the other day, where we were going to a pub to meet somebody, not really for drinks. It was more for a kind of quick. My wife had to catch up with somebody, and they said, "Yeah, we'll do it at this pub because it's nice and central." It was actually a Green King pub, but I said it was a really cold day, and I said to my wife, "I really hope when we get in there, it's lovely and toasty. I really hope we go in here and it is cozy." We hadn't been into this pub for quite a while, even though it's not too far away from us, and we went in, and the fires were roaring, and it was so cozy. It was absolutely lovely, and it was just, we sit down, have a nice comfy drink. She did her meeting. I was just sitting around with my little boy, just keeping him occupied while she was doing it. But it was that kind of coming in out the cold into the heat. Obviously, not the heat isn't the entire thing to do with hospitality, but I think that kind of real welcoming, friendly, cozy, well, comfortable. I can't necessarily say cozy, but comfortable. That, whether it's, I mean, obviously hospitality extends to a lot of things, doesn't it? I mean, it extends to talking about my little boy. It extends to soft plays and things like that. I mean, at the end of the day, if you can put someone somewhere, they've got a nice comfy seat and they feel safe and they feel welcomed, that's hospitality, isn't it? And then I think, as I say, this case the other day was just absolutely spot on. And funnily enough, I'd been to several other hospitality venues in recent months on cold days where they seem to be scrimping on the heating a little bit. And you could really tell it. In one of the places, I was in there for about 3 or 4 hours, and I said to the lady, "Is it just me, or is it just colder in here?" And this lady working here said, "Oh yeah, it has got cold, isn't it?" And I thought, well, you've got to do something about it. I think that kind of contrast to actually just offering, certainly with pubs and stuff like that at this time of year, having that place where someone can just walk in the door and they know they're going to be looked after, but they know they're going to be cozy, they know they're going to be comfortable. For me, that's a huge part of what it is. And then coming over to the food and beverage side that we're looking at, I think for me, it's just people offering something that's quite unique, whether it be one or several kind of selling points, something that place does that you don't get in every single place. I mean, on a wine point of view, it's just, obviously, again, with you and I have talked about hotels plenty, and I think so many hotel wine lists, you go into it and you think, I just don't know what I can possibly choose from that list. There's just, I mean, I've seen some lists where they've got, I don't know, 2 entry-level Merlots by the glass, for example, and you think, well, what on earth is that doing for anyone? It's not offering anything extra to your guests. It's complicating things for your staff, for your stock holding, etc., etc. But yeah, so I'd say, yeah, for me, that kind of just being welcoming, being comfortable in terms of a venue, and then, like I say, from an F&B point of view, it just, for me, it's kind of having something that makes you go away and say, have you been to this place? They've got this. I mean, obviously it's nice to talk in general positives, but for me, that's kind of quite a special one. If they've got a real big unique selling point or several unique selling points that you're not seeing everywhere, I think that's, from an F&B point of view, that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I always use the word aspirational when people tell me examples of what you like, and I certainly, when I was working in hotels more than restaurants, it was always, how can we be aspirational for people? So when people come in, you have the real wood fires that you don't have at home, for example, and they're always roaring and they're always topped up. You have the best pillows, you have the best beds, you have the best F&B, because it's what people buy experiences for, isn't it? So it's you going into a pub that's nice and toasty, and especially with cost of living and things like that nowadays, it makes small little marginal gains for these places that keeps people in there for an extra drink or an extra couple of drinks, doesn't it? So it's a great example.
100%. And there's a few places I go to where they're nice places. They are really, really nice places, but they don't have that, certainly at this time of year, they don't really have that cozy feeling. And I think when you're speaking to friends or family about, right, where should we go? Where should we pop into for lunch or drinks? When it is this cold, or as cold as it has been in the last few weeks, you are obviously thinking I'm literally thinking about fireplaces. I'm thinking about who's got a fireplace, or who keeps the place nice and cozy. And that, someone might be paying a little bit more on heating, or obviously piling on loads of logs on that fire. But actually, to create that in your mind of thinking, they're the place, that's the place that's going to look after me. I think that's priceless.
Yeah, it goes. There's a big thing in that, I think. I mean, I said a lot about how the coffee place in my high street doesn't have the best coffee necessarily. Good coffee, don't get me wrong, but it's probably not the best. But what they do is they'll do the customer bit really, really well. I don't have to order my coffee on a morning. When I go in with my kids, they make sure the kids get the drinks nice and quick, no matter how big the queue is. And it's all those little bits, isn't it, that it doesn't really matter if it's not the best. As long as it's good, those little bits can make a huge difference to go into the guy down the road who doesn't even look at you when he takes the order and things. So it makes a huge difference, doesn't it? And you'll probably see this a lot in wine with the people that you're working with, especially in, a great wine business requires people to be able to really engage with customers properly, doesn't it? It makes a massive difference to how wine sales move.
Yeah. And I think funny enough, I touched on a sort of seeing lists that have got, say, 2 Merlots by the glass and things like that. And I think there's just so many lists where you look at it and you think, has this list been compiled entirely by an accounts department as opposed to by anyone beverage related? Because you look at it and you think there's absolutely no reason for, as I say, doesn't benefit the guest, doesn't benefit the staff, doesn't benefit, as I say, the stock holding. It's just baffling. And I think that kind of, as I say, the funny thing with that particular example I use of those 2 Merlots is that actually the staff, a lot of the time, are going to bring someone the Merlot they didn't want, for example, somehow, even though it shouldn't really be a concern. And literally, if you substitute a product like that and put something in that's a little bit interesting, something a little bit different, maybe in something that's similar to Merlot in style, but the staff know, oh, this is similar to Merlot and it's not just your average Merlot, and you give them a little quick bit of training, then actually they can sort of educate and make that customer discover something new. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that kind of I think there's a lot, because obviously I do a lot of wine training stuff as well, and there's so many places where in some cases they insist they do wine training, and we train, but all you got to do is experience the team for a few minutes and see that it's very much what I'm trying to kind of eradicate it from the wine point of view, which is tick box training. It's very much kind of, right, here's a session for you. It's not talking to people in their language. It's not talking to people on their kind of time scale, if you like, it's not making it simple. It's not making it understandable. It's not talking to them in real sort of normal people's language, if you like. And as a result of that, the staff go away and know absolutely zero about it. And then exactly like you referred to, you can't actually give guests that wow factor, that kind of, I've come in here and you've told me about a wine that I'm definitely not going to get informed about if I go into 9 out of 10 of the other places I'll go into. So I think that's quite an important thing.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. And we're going to touch on training quite a bit shortly, because I think there's a big shake-up, I guess, in terms of how people are training the people at the minute, particularly using suppliers to lead it. But before we get into that, I guess it's good to give people social proof of why we're sitting here today talking about wine with you. So why don't you tell us what your journey was, how you got into wine, and then how you got to what you're doing today, which is giving people so much wealth of knowledge around wine and wine lists.
Yeah, so I basically I came into wine. I stumbled into wine. I mean, the same as a lot of people go into their career, they kind of end up stumbling into it. I was at college doing graphic design. Graphic design has actually benefited me quite a lot in what I'm doing now, because I'm able to do a lot of my own layouts and stuff like that. But so I was doing graphic design. I was working at Sainsbury's, at a local Sainsbury's store, and at the time it was a shelf stacking job. That, as far as I was concerned, I was there. It was a stacking shelves job. It's just a quick one. But then I happened to get there was a manager who I got on well with, and he knew I was a hard worker, and he said, "Look, I'm going to move you over to the booze bit." So he was on the booze bit, and he wanted me to basically do a lot of his work for him, pretty much. So he chucked me over onto the booze bit. And then he basically, again, it's a nice one, but it's a cliche. And that kind of, you have that boss who just engages you a little bit and just shows you that these items going on the shelves or going on displays are not just being filled up for the sake of it. This is in a position for a certain reason. This is the reason people buy this, is this. And then I was quite lucky in that actually, I'm not sure about supermarket. I know a lot of them have basically cut down supermarkets in terms of investing in people now. And I was very lucky in that they put me through, I did WSET, intermediate and advanced, when I was with Sainsbury's, which I mean, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I doubt many of them would get a chance to do now if they're working on the booze department at Sainsbury's. So yeah, I did that. And then I never know, I could have ended up just carrying on in retail, because basically the manager ended up leaving, and I ended up taking on the booze department for a bit in this store and running it. But it was one of those where, I think, to be completely honest, I was getting a mickey taken out of me a little bit. It was the store manager not giving me the senior role and just wanting me to carry on and get all the work done for him and deliver all these high numbers without actually being rewarded for it. And then somebody I knew who was in PR, was doing PR for a new restaurant opening, fine dining restaurant, and I'd advised her and her husband on wine a lot, and they said, oh yeah, they're looking for junior sommeliers, kind of trainee sommeliers. So as I say, at the time, it was well timed for me to just sort of look at something different, because as I say, I was a bit wound up with kind of being taken advantage of a little bit from the amount I was delivering for the store without being remunerated for it. And so I went off and did this. And so I was quite lucky in that, although it was Milton Keynes direction, the team was, which is not far from me, I'm just over in Bedford, and I think the team was a lot of London restaurant background people. So a lot of people who had been in good restaurants, whether that be chefs or front of house. And the head sommelier at the time taught me a load. We had a couple of 100 bins on the list. So I went from learning about day-to-day wines in a supermarket to all of a sudden learning about coat rotis and etc. So really sort of jumped up. And so that gave me a real good sort of second level of knowledge, really. And then basically, having met reps in the restaurant, I kind of thought, oh yeah, I could do that. I could enjoy it. I could go for the sales side of things. And I went for a sales job with a really small company, did that, then went on to do a few other sales bits. And basically, when I was doing the sales, what I always did was, when producing wine lists for people, was create a kind of business plan for them, rather than just saying, right, okay, what's your Prosecco price? Here's my Prosecco price, etc., etc. I very much did it in terms of structuring the list and saying, look, if you do it like this, your spend will go up like this. And that's always kind of how I did it. So it was essentially free wine consultancy they were getting from their supplier. And that was always the way I did it. So when it came to going off on my own, I had dozens and dozens and dozens of case studies, if you like, of wine list restructuring I'd done, where I'd said, look, trust me, if you do this here and this here, all of a sudden your spend will be there instead of there. And I still bump into people today, or sort of contacts that I don't really see much these days, and rave about the time when I told them to move that product to there, and all of a sudden their spend moved to here. So it's something that is kind of it was quite a natural progression to do that. And I think again with the training, I always used to do my own training. So when I was doing supply work, I always did that. I used to have, funny enough, since I was at school, I've always had people say I should be a teacher. My wife's a teacher, funnily enough, but I've never actually wanted to teach at schools. But then, funnily enough, now I'm doing more and more training. Training is a huge focus for me as well these days. And as I say, it's funny looking back to when I was 16 and people saying, "Oh, you should be a teacher. You should be a teacher. You could be a teacher." And then now I've been told for some years that I'm quite good at explaining wine to people who don't know about wine. So obviously when it comes to hospitality, front of house these days, I feel it's more important than ever. There's more and more people who can do with not just learning about wine, but learning about it from someone who doesn't speak to them in wine terms and doesn't use wine snobbery and talks to them in ways that your everyday consumer or your everyday member of staff can understand. So yeah, that's pretty much sort of hopefully not too long-winded. That brings us from where I started in wine, really.
No, it's brilliant. And I think, it's so interesting, isn't it? When you speak to lots of people in the industry and they all fall into it somehow and then just get this little bug coming from learning new things every day. And, wine's certainly one of them, isn't it? I remember early in my career, it was, wines, champagnes and things like that were always the thing that used to interest me. And I think I always remember walking down Piccadilly once, after an event with Moet and Chandon with Dom Perignon, and I was walking down, and I can't remember how old I was, but it was probably mid-20s, and I was thinking, I'm this guy from Yorkshire who's walking down Piccadilly in the centre of London, having just drunk a night of Dom Perignon. Not many industries can give you that type of thing for free, where you don't have to pay the bill, and it's those little things, isn't it, that make like huge difference in this industry. And it's really, even now, I find it so interesting when I speak to, I'm working with one client, and the F&B director is so passionate about wine. And it's so nice to see that there's still that passion in the industry for things like this, because it's so tough at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that kind of, I think that idea of, when you said, "Oh, what industry could you get this as someone as that age and you get access to this?" I think also that's something that, for example, when I do my training, I try and kind of give the staff to start off with a little bit of an idea of, like, say, where I came from and what kind of, because some of these staff obviously could be in a position exactly like I was when I stumbled into it, where they're at college, they're working at the restaurant just to get a bit of cash in. And they might just be looking at wine and thinking, and I'm sure a lot of them do, I'm certain a lot of them do, they might be sitting there thinking, well, just do this. The boss has told me to do it, so we'll do it. Yeah, okay. I don't really care about wine, but whatever. And actually, I think in a lot of the cases, I kind of explained to the team, look, I've stumbled into wine and I've worked in wine all these years. And also you can get these, obviously you get a lot of people who've worked their career in hospitality and wine who become international brand managers and brand ambassadors and things like that. And there's some incredibly exciting branches that kind of come off it when you come into this industry. And I think, as I say, I think that's certainly from a training point of view, I think that's a big issue that a lot of the staff have. They kind of get told, you're coming to this training, you do this training, but I don't think a lot of them see the bigger picture and kind of see, right, okay, well, what could I, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, everyone wants to do stuff in general, especially these youngsters, because they get something out of it. They want to know what they're going to get out of it. And I think in that case, I think to actually say, look, this is how I came into wine, I kind of stumbled into it and my career's gone in that direction. Because as I say, a lot of these kids, I say kids, they are youngsters, a lot of these guys that you train in the hotels and stuff, they might be 18, 20, they might be at college, they might be at uni, and they might have absolutely no idea, not just what they're going to do in their life, but also what a career in wine or career in hospitality can actually deliver for them.
Yeah, 100%. I think I totally agree with you on that. And I think, what I'm seeing a lot as well in the industry right now is because of, overwhelm of senior leaders or general managers, because people are being fast tracked through the system and not necessarily picking up the experience that might have been there previously, because job buddies seem to have kind of gone nowadays. External help is becoming so much more important, where you're bringing in resource to help your leaders effectively. So tell us a little bit more about how you work with different clients and what services you offer and what help you can bring to those people, because I'd be really interested to know what are like the main pain points that you solve, and whether it aligns with some of that.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously the elements that I do, obviously I've just talked quite a bit about training there, but also the wine list consultancy stuff. And I think you mentioned about your client previously, who is massively passionate about wine as a beverage director. And I think obviously you will get these people who have got absolute passion for it and a huge knowledge of it, and have probably got a huge amount of background building wine lists and things like that. Whereas I think from the wine list consultancy point of view, there's I think essentially one of my key skills is my knowledge of consumer spending patterns, where people spend, the grapes they go for, the regions they go for. I think you get a lot of people, even, I mean, obviously there's some phenomenal sommeliers out there, and a lot of sommeliers have got dictionary knowledge of wine well above what I have. However, what I've seen with some ex-sommeliers and stuff that I've worked with is obviously because they've been in a certain type of restaurant, they don't actually seem to pick up as much of consumer trends, because obviously they're guiding. They tend to be guiding. They're not saying, I mean, now and again they might say, what do you normally drink? But typically they are guiding. They're putting you on a sort of road of discovery. Whereas what I do with my wine list reviews is basically work on the fact that I know roughly what the top sellers would be. I know roughly what these people are going to open the list and look for, pretty much, and is to kind of structure everything else around that, using my experience across, I mean, everything from kind of fine dining restaurants, hotels, pubs, all sorts, to know what kind of spending patterns are going to happen. And I think that from a wine list structure point of view is really important. And then funnily enough, what you just said about leaders not having time. I mean, leaders not having time is a massive one now. I mean, I've just completed a wine list review for a restaurant, and it's front of house. It's owners, co-owners, husband and wife, husband in the kitchen and wife out front. But she'd kind of, I think with wine, again, this is a sort of alert to everyone out there, because duty has jumped 20% in August. That's something to keep a real eye on. But then also cost of everything's gone up. So, and obviously this is going to cut, people are going to be dealing with this in food and all sorts, but obviously wine's the area I know about. And if people aren't keeping a really close eye on their pricing and a real close dialogue with their suppliers, they could be very, very shocked by where their margins sit. And I think this, funnily enough, this list review I basically, to start the list review, I take their list, I take all their pricing. And there were several things before I'd seen any of their pricing. I looked at their list and I thought, that margin is going to be bad. That's going to be a really bad margin, just because it's a product from a certain region where you know that the average price is, you can't really go below a certain price now. And I pulled it apart, and in terms of, and then I presented it to the owners before making my suggestions in terms of changing the list, and basically said, look, here you go. So this is where your margins sit at the moment. This is your average sale for 175ml glass, your average sale for 250 glass, average sale for the bottle in white, red, rosé, sparkling, etc. And the jaws hit the floor in terms of actually seeing where their margins were at that moment. And what had happened is basically the owners, by their own admission, had tasked it to one of their sort of more wine savvy front of house staff. But I just think this is no reflection on that member of staff at all, because it could easily be that some of these price increases have come in since that member of staff left. But it was, I mean, they wanted to be on 70% GP, and there was sort of maximum 65s. And this product that I saw on the list without seeing the cost prices and thought that's going to be low was on 53. and it was by the glass as well. And I think so that's when you refer to sort of management or senior teams just not having the time. That was a real classic example of that, because these guys are switched on business people. They're not clueless in terms of margins at all. It's not one of those where you think, oh, they've come into the industry from another industry maybe and they don't really know how it works. It's not that. It was they had so much on their plate, and they trusted that wine list structure and margins to this other member of staff. And it as I say, it was margin wise. I mean, a lot of the wine list reviews I do, I never promise people increased margin when I do the wine list reviews, because my assumption is that their margins are where they should be when I start. So I do wine list reviews that promise people an increased average spend because of the restructuring I do, strategic restructuring. But with this one, obviously, I'll have boosted the margins massively for them, and the increased spend will have happened because of the way I've restructured it. But yeah, so I think hopefully that's not going on too much about the kind of wine consultancy stuff, but that's the real value, I think, on that side.
Yeah, no, and I think you've picked up on a couple of points where, and we've had these conversations before, about one, I think bringing outside perspective is really key. And I say this to our clients quite a bit, is that we're working with other businesses, big, small, medium, different parts of the sector. And we are seeing what's going on in the market because we're spending time in it. So we bring a different level of expertise from that perspective. And you're doing the same thing. You're seeing which wines people are buying in various places, and you know, the new Pinot Grigio on the block, the new New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc on the block. And you're seeing that first, so you can bring that for people to get ahead of the game. And I think that's why at times bringing in external help can be just as important as having great people in your own business. And then the other thing that struck out to me there, and you know, it's another point I bring up to clients as well, is objectivity. Because you'll have seen it over the years, and I know I've dealt with it over the years as ops director, F&B director, is wine list by ego or wine list by preference, and not necessarily building a really nice structured list. And that objectivity that you can bring to it can have a massive effect on the success of the list, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think it's funny enough you mentioned about Pinot Grigio in that last comment. And funny enough, this latest list review I did, again, when you talk about our experience of what's going on out there, I know what people are paying for Pinot Grigio. I know what people are paying for whatever it may be. I mean, obviously, when you get to things like Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs, which is obviously a sales beast these days, things like Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs and Malbecs, you tend to find people you get some venues who are going for more price, and you get some venues who are going for more premium on that particular category. Whereas I think when Pinot Grigio comes into effect, I looked at the cost price they were paying on that, and I thought, wow, that's high for a Pinot Grigio by the glass. And the first thing I say to them, again, I don't do my wine list reviews of ego. I don't say you need to change this, you need to. So these guys were able to stick with the two suppliers they had already. I just restructured it, used products from the other suppliers had. I said, look, these are the ones we need to hunt down from the suppliers. But the Pinot Grigio was one of those. I said to him straight away, I said, have you got a following for this brand? This brand of Pinot Grigio? Have you got customers who need this brand? Are they saying, where's the, as I say, that whatever it might be, brand of Pinot Grigio? They said, no, I don't think so. I think people are just ordering it because it's Pinot Grigio. I said, okay, well, the cost price is miles above what it should be for Pinot Grigio. So we'll speak to the supplier. We'll find out, is there any movement on the price point of that? If there's no movement, what are your alternatives? What else have we got? So we asked both suppliers and look at what's available, because as I say, some of these things, because I know, because I'm doing these wine tenders and wine list reviews for people, I know what people are paying. And at the end of the day, I've always been about quality. I've never been about price. So I will never say, look at that price, get rid of it. But it's just, I mean, I mentioned about that product that was 53% GP and it was by the glass. And I said, look, listen, I know that's selling well, but realistically, the wine by the glass, the price you're going to have to sell it for to make your full margin. I put it in a margin calculator for them. I said, look, bang, that's what you have to sell your 175 for. And they're straight away like, no way, can't do it. And so it's one of those where, again, one thing I'd always say to people on wine lists, this is why I asked about that brand of Pinot Grigio, is don't ever be held to, I don't even say held to ransom, it's a bad expression a little bit, but that kind of, don't get too attached to a brand or a product, because if you get attached to a producer or a brand of Pinot Grigio or Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc or whatever, then you really are going to hurt yourself from a business point of view in a lot of cases, because the supplier knows you're not going to delist it. And I'm not saying the supplier is going to be calculated about that, but if you're showing no intention of changing it at any point ever, you're obviously not going to be able to negotiate as strongly on that kind of product. And as I say, for me, it's all about, I mean, that word value in the UK has kind of lost its real meaning, hasn't it? And I think value, I mean, you can get a gold-plated Rolls Royce, couldn't you? It could be value, as long as it's, if you get a high quality product, depending on what you pay for something, is value. If you get something really good, even if it's really expensive, if that price relatively is good, it's value. Whereas I think a lot of the time in the UK now, people's idea of the word value is cheap, and I think value for money, that kind of thing, has kind of fallen off a little bit on that front. But yeah, I mean, funnily enough, sort of talking about value, funnily enough, just stumble on that word. But you mentioned about training as well, and we were saying about wine training, and as I say, what I've been trying to do is kind of just get rid of this tick box training stuff. Really try and because, like you said, often it's people using supplier training, and again, I'm not trying to criticize specific suppliers or anything like that. Some of them do it very, very well. There's a lot of good training out there, but equally there's training where people are just saying, yeah, we'll have that training because that training is cheap. And well, I say it's cheap, it's free. Basically, it's free training, and they're getting it delivered, and you just know from the way the staff react to it and the way it's gone, the staff have picked up no extra information on the wine. So you haven't paid anything out for the training, but you've not getting anything back from the training. So you kind of, as you were, you've essentially, well, I say you're as you were, you've probably lost money because you had to pay your staff to be there for the couple of hours training. So you have lost money from that point of view. But I think when it actually comes to, as I say, what I'm trying to do with my training is very much talking to people in ways they understand. And actually, again, because one huge problem that wine's got as a whole is educating consumers. I think wine is losing a lot of market share to drinkers are going to spirits or beers or whatever, because wine hasn't got that that sort of general understanding. I think there's just, I think even the retailers, even the supermarkets and stuff, they're not really, any of them, doing a great job in terms of educating the everyday consumer. And I think most people who go into supermarkets and buy these more premium wines, say 10 to 20 pounds, that kind of bracket in supermarkets, and people who are buying that kind of price point regularly are going to tend to be older people who have got that little bit more knowledge of classic regions, for example. So they'll go in and spend £15 on Chablis and stuff like this, when you're sort of next generation will go to a wine shelf and be absolutely baffled. And I think supermarkets, for example, don't really do that very well, where it's kind of, I don't know, if you like this, you'll love this. If you're eating this, let's just say, for example, we come up to Christmas at the moment. I mean, I've seen it once or twice in places a little bit at certain festive times of the year, but I think should be done more often. Is this particular wine is great with this dish. Because also what I've seen a few times is people recommending Malbec with beef, for example. And I look at it and I think Malbec doesn't need any help selling. I mean, everyone knows that Malbec's good with beef. It's so well marketed, that fact now. Obviously your gauchos and things like that, it's sort of Malbec and beef is so well recognized. And literally every other dad I speak to, my son's friends, and speak to their dad, and they find out I do wine for a living, and they say, I love Malbec. I love that Malbec. It's the first thing they say, any of them. Like, I was speaking to one the other day, and he said, I had a really good Malbec the other day. And it just pops out to everyone. Whereas there's so many other products on the shelf that you could, as I say, have a little feature in a supermarket or wherever saying, if you're having beef, try these couple of wines, different price points that you can try that will go really well, and just educate people in general more. And then when they're coming into hospitality, they're going to they're going to have a little bit more of a wider knowledge, right? And they're not just going to be going for Malbecs and Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs. So I think, as I say, what I'm trying to do from a training point of view is really get sort of down to the basics for staff in terms of, I think I might have mentioned to you before, where I give them bespoke training booklets. So the booklets have got the grapes of the product, they've got the pronunciation of the product, they've got some food pairings for the product, because my angle on that is I don't think it's a very good way of learning for everyone to just stare at a projector all day long. And I think a lot of learning is done like that. Here you go, stare at this screen and there's 50 details about wine up there that none of you understand. So what I try and do is put a few basics in the booklet for them, so they can put their focus onto hearing the odd maybe USPs and stuff that I might talk about, or actually just tasting it properly and tasting it against another product and saying, right, the difference between that is that, and noting it down on their bit of paper and saying, I like that instead of that because of that. And I think that for me is really where the difference comes in training. And sorry, go on.
No. I was just about to chip in, because one of the best trainings that I used to like on wine was when you would get, and I got this most often happen with champagne, is where you'd get the different champagnes lined up. So you might have, Veuve Clicquot, Ruinart, Laurent Perrier, Bollinger, etc. And you would taste the difference between them. And very rarely, when you're working with suppliers, they create your list, or you create your list, you pick, and then they come in and they'll go, okay, we're now going to try the wines by the glass. And it'll be one Sauvignon, one Pinot Grigio, one Chardonnay, and you'd never really compare why that Sauvignon was way better than other Sauvignons. And I think, back to your point there, when you're doing it by variety and you're looking at tasting against one another, it really does show the benefits of that one particular type. And okay, you might have to do 2 or 3 more sessions, but we did the last live panel talk with 3 guys who are deep into training, and their thesis around their platform, there was Jason Berkowitz, there was Julia Smith from Blend, was all around kind of short form content where people don't have to take in too much information, because it's just not how we consume data and knowledge anymore, right? So if you can go really specific and say, this is Sauvignon Blanc, this is the quality of Sauvignon Blanc, this is how it's made, and this might be a French, this might be a New Zealand, and you're starting to compare, they're going to come out of it with much more knowledge to talk about that one Sauvignon Blanc. And I always say to people, it's better to know 2 or 3 wines really, really well that might sit at 3 or 4 on your wines by the glass by price than it is to know a little bit about everything and actually not be able to sell any, because it's going to have a much better benefit. So back to your point there, I think going specific and niching down is really going to help your team, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And this is why, as I say, it's a bit of a, I find it quite annoying when I see retailers or whatever recommend a Malbec to go with beef, because I just think, I mean, realistically, you guys, most of your buying teams are MWs, and I think if your recommendation pairing is Malbec with beef, I mean, it could be a bit more impressive than that, I'm sure. But yeah, it's a funny one, because I think that kind of whatever industry you're in my opinion, whatever industry you're in, if you get shown another industry, so say for example, as I say, when I say that, it's like wine is a new industry, a new category in terms of information to a lot of these people that I speak to, is the best way, absolute best way, is like you say, not just not making it too complicated, but also comparisons. It like you referred to with those champagnes, everything's got to be about comparisons. Is that if I don't know, like we mentioned on LinkedIn, didn't we, about not tasting too many products when you do a training. And so I say, I always, typically 6, 7, something like that. And it's kind of 2 whites to compare, 2 reds to compare, that kind of thing. Just give people that idea, that little comparison. Because I just think if people, because not only is it nice to get that understanding yourself, but equally, once you get the comparison, you understand that, I don't know, Pinot Noir's lighter body than Malbec, for example. That means it can go with these dishes rather than these dishes. And then you get into that kind of, so you've got that basic understanding, but then it then takes you into that category of, okay, so Malbec's full-bodied and Pinot Noir's slightly lighter bodied. Okay, so what are the other full-bodied ones? And what are the other light-bodied ones? And then, so that allows then the member of staff to speak to the consumer and get into the neck of the woods of, what do you normally enjoy? Oh, what do you normally like? Because for me, I think that's a little bit deeper down in terms of the training. But I think if staff can get to that point where they can say to a guest, well, what do you normally drink? And then actually pull something out that impresses them based on that. I mean, that's dream world in terms of training, to be completely honest. But I do think that you only get to that point through comparisons, because what a lot of people do is, again, every time I do wine training, it's always, everyone's got to have the wines against each other. You've got to have them in the glass at the same time. Whereas I think a lot of people, what they do, whether it's a training or whether it's a tasting that they go to, it's only one glass at a time. You go around, you empty, you fill, you empty, you fill, you empty, you fill. And everything with me is kind of comparison. So you do 2 whites like this, and then you'll go, okay, that first one we've done. So that gets poured out. And then the next one comes. So you've done a comparison between those two. Now you do a comparison between those two. So now you see the difference. And for me, that's the huge way of learning, is comparisons. I mean, even with production, as a champagne grower that I used to work with, and their production was less than 300,000 bottles. And they're quite a big grower, but very small compared to obviously the big boys in champagne and production. But what's funny is they would talk to customers, wine dinners and presentations to buyers and things like that, and they'd say, oh, we're 300,000 bottles, it's under 300,000 bottles. And a lot of the time, especially with consumers, you get people go, oh, quite big then, quite big. And then I'd say to her, look, do you want to just explain to them how many bottles Veuve Clicquot make, or how many Moet make? And then as soon as they do that comparison, people go, oh my goodness, wow, you're absolutely tiny. Because as I say, it's a new world to people, and they just don't understand. And unless you do those kind of, for me, as I say, everything's about comparisons. In terms of teaching, it's got to be about comparisons. It's got to say, I don't know, you know how that works. So for example, I was comparing rosé, talking to some staff about rosé the other day, and comparing it to tea. So obviously putting a tea bag in the water, the longer you leave it in there, the more color that tea gets. And I was using that as an example to talk to them about Provence rosé. So saying to them, look, because Provence rosé's only got that tiny, tiny bit of color to it, but it's actually got a lot of flavor to it, because the grapes that produce it are quite full-bodied tannic grapes. But you just got that kind of essentially equivalent of like the tea bag just dips in and comes out. So the water's still fairly clear. And I think that kind of, again, I find that when you say something like you relate it to tea, so they don't drink wine, for example, some of these people, I do training with people who don't drink alcohol at all. And so you've got to do the training entirely based on USPs and stories. And you need to tell them that this is buttery and creamy, this is zesty and fresh, and you need to do it in words. You can't say, see, taste that and see what you think, because it's, and this is where, I mean, we can go on in a minute to talk about sort of wine list structure, because I think this is where those kind of comparisons for me are the absolute king in terms of getting people to try new things.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I'll lead quite nicely into that actually, because I guess my key takeaway from that, and maybe the people who will be listening to this will pick it up, is you're almost better training in how it tastes and what the makeup of the wine is. So as you were saying, fruity and zesty, or on the reds it might be dark fruits and what have you, so that people can go up, or the teams can go up to people and go, what would you normally drink? What style do you normally drink? And lead it in. And then that opens up then 2 or 3 different options. And you're almost better doing it that way, aren't you, than trying to go, okay, this is our Sauvignon, this is our Chardonnay, etc., etc. Is that how you see the best wine list written, in terms of being able to direct the consumer into the right area of wine, or do you structure them a different way?
Yeah, I definitely would. I mean, funnily enough, I alluded to it already, but for me, the big thing, this is it's kind of like a bit of a soundbite really, in terms of speaking to operators. But I would just say that, as I mentioned earlier, the education in general is so poor for the everyday consumer. Most people just don't get those kind of comparisons in everyday media, that they are automatically focusing all the sales are going to a certain amount of products. So one thing I'd say is this kind of like soundbite, if you like, is for an operator, if you're making a new list or if you're updating your list and thinking of adding something that you've had at a tasting and you think, wow, what a wine. I've got to show that to my guests. I've got to have this on my list so my guests can enjoy that wine, is to say to yourself, will this wine sell itself? And if it won't sell itself, what do I do to sell it? I think for me, that's the biggest point here, because I think so many people, I think you and I might have touched on this before, actually, where you say a buyer will go to a tasting and say, what a great wine, what a great wine. I'm buying it. It's going on my list. They stick it on the list. And I've heard so many operators in the past say, oh, that's not selling. It's such a good wine. No one's ordering it. No one's ordering it. And this is a lot when I was in sales as well, when they'd take something when they come to one of your tastings, put it on their list, and they'd be saying, oh, no one's ordering it. No one's ordering it. And you say, well, they don't know. How are they going to know it's a really good wine? Because a lot of the time you might have, this might be, I don't know, an owner buying the wines who isn't doing the vast majority of table service. And there's nothing actually on their list that's going to tell them how good that wine is. And I think I've seen, I mean, I've been asked by, there's a restaurant that stands in my mind. I went into a fine dining restaurant once to help them out with basically tidying up the stock. The stock was just all over the place, but you could see, as going through a lot of this stock that was in too large quantities, there were so many obscure grapes, so many obscure grapes. And I'm looking at them, and one or two of the grapes, I was thinking, what's that? And I've worked in the wine industry for all these years, and I'm thinking, so what? And it just reeked to me of the buyer going to a tasting or having a supplier come to him, taste with him, he'd gone, great wine, I've got to put that on my list, which is fine, but there's got to be a sales strategy. There's got to be this is pairing with this dish. This is, we're going to have a message on it, like, try this with this dish. Or, as I say, if you've got Wine Flight, obviously, if you're doing Wine Flight and taster menus, obviously it's a little bit easier to put something unusual on there and get people to take it. But I just think that kind of, for a lot of people, that strategy is not there. You're buying the wine, but the strategy of exactly how your customers are going to have that communicated to them, how good that wine is, isn't there. And then what ends up as a result of that is, as a business, you end up holding a lot of stock of products that aren't going anywhere. And actually, like we referred to earlier, if you train people on a couple of products, so that, as I say, if you compare it to a dish and you can actually put it on a taster menu, fantastic. But if you've got, your staff are going to have to hand sell it, then, like we said, or like you referred to, just give them a bit of training on that wine or that white and that red that are a little bit unusual. Because I think one thing I'd say as well is, because by the glass sales dominate sales so much, do not be fooled into thinking that just because you put this wine by the glass, it's going to move. An obscure wine is still going to sell very little by the glass as it is by the bottle. I mean, again, another client, I had to go and help with their, like, restructuring their wine list and sorting out their stock and things like this. And they had a lot of stock of a lot of different products. And it was a kind of combination where they had some stuff that were very obscure and then some stuff that was actually a bit more recognized. So, for example, they had loads of Picpoul de Pinet, and Picpoul de Pinet is recognized enough and popular enough that I said to him, it wasn't by the glass. I don't know why they had so much stock. They probably had 6 months stock sitting in their cellar because they were going to sell it by the bottle. I said, look, put the Picpoul on by the glass, okay, see how it goes. It was from an old supplier, I think. It was still decent vintage. It hadn't gone past it. It was still drinking well. I said, put it on by the glass. You haven't got a Picpoul by the glass at the moment, and it will move because people recognize it. But then actually, and then I sort of said to them, look, if it keeps moving and you want to keep it on, then you can get another Picpoul at a time. But then there was some of these other wines were so obscure, and they were kind of saying to me, oh, should we put them by the glass as well? I said, no, there's just no point, because you'd open a bottle and you'd maybe sell a glass out the bottle, and then you got the wastage concern. So literally what I did at the time was kind of take all these wines that were obscure and look at the menu, the taster menu they had. And I said, right, okay, that will go with that. That will go with that. That will go with that. And then once you sold those wines, change the flight to this, and this. Like, I had a kind of like follow-on list for them. I said, look, so you put things like Picpoul that people will actually go for by the glass. You put these other ones on the flight, and they'll start to move. But as I say, that kind of education, training obviously helps, but I think little kind of point of sale and connecting it to dishes for me is absolutely priceless. Because if you can say to somebody, we've chosen this wine to go with that dish, people lap it up. People absolutely love it. And that comes into that category, like we said earlier, of really good hospitality, offering something totally different.
Yeah, I think I think you're dead right there. I think sometimes as well, because wine is so emotive and so personal, I think sometimes operators don't see it commercially, do they? You know, in terms of making sure that every bottle in that cellar is turning over. How many times do you order the bottles of wine? And I have these conversations with people when we're doing wine lists or we're talking about beverage GPs and stock holding. Is especially in hotels where you're not as involved in things like cash flow as you might be in independent restaurants. You know, you don't realize the value of this stuff that sits in the cellar. Sometimes because you're in busy hotels with lots of revenue, you might not see the value of what that stock holding might be. In an independent restaurant, you absolutely would, because you have cash sitting in the cellar. So I always look at and ask conversations with people of, you know, how long has that one bottle been sat in the cellar? How long has that one bottle been sat on the shelf? Because if it isn't turning over regularly, then you have to start asking questions about the size of the list, the type of wines on the list, and you have to start, you know, looking at all of these, because sometimes you're better having a smaller list that's selling well and turning over than a big list that looks great on paper, but actually commercially, maybe 25% of it is actually doing what it needs to do as a business. And that's where it comes back to that piece around, you know, the so emotive. And you know, it's like dealing with a chef with meat and fruit and vegetables. Sometimes dealing with a general manager or a food and beverage manager with wine, isn't it? It becomes so emotive. But we have to remember that it's a commercial tool to drive revenue for your business. And if something isn't sitting there making cash, look at retail stores. You know, they allocate everything revenue per square meter, and if something isn't selling, it doesn't get restocked for the next line. And I think sometimes we should be looking at wine in the same mix as if this was a retail store, would it still be on the shelves?
Yeah, and I think there's so much. Obviously, for me, it's all kind of, it's just so second nature to me. So it's a weird one, because it's kind of like you say, you see that bottle sitting there and immediately it jumps out, and you think, or as I say, that time when there was loads of pick pool stock and the pick pool wasn't by the glass, and I think, I haven't even looked at your sales, but I know you've got a lot of money sitting there in stock that's just not needed. And it just reeked to me of that particular situation of someone just not having seen there's some hidden stock somewhere and someone just reordered, and it was a little bit like that. But I think you're right. And I think with wine, I think I said about lack of understanding and lack of knowledge. I think also the amount of times in my kind of consultancy or training thing where I just have people say, oh, our supplier sorts that out, or our supplier's got people who sort that out. And you think, well, they're not doing what I'm doing, because I'm going to take your whole thing apart and figure out exactly what's working, exactly what could work for you. And as I said earlier about the list reviews I do, there's no kind of you must work with this supplier or anything like that. Is if you want to stay with the same suppliers, fine. But what I will do with my list reviews, typically, sometimes it'll only be a handful of changes. It might be 4 wines. It might just be moving some stuff around, a couple of little changes to just automatically, by putting the right things in the right places, automatically increase your spend. But as I say, it's not even necessarily a supplier change. It's just a lot of the time people are taking a list that's given to them. I mean, I said earlier on about, you look at a list sometimes and you think, was that put together by a beverage person at all, or was it put together by someone in finance who's just looked at what all the best priced products are and chucked them on there? And I think, yeah, I mean, probably good time to kind of come on to when we were talking about the kind of overall like structure of lists, is that I was saying about the I'm a huge fan for this reason of relating one thing to another. I'm a huge fan and a huge advocate of style categories on wine lists. I mean, you, funny enough, on LinkedIn, you referred to I think I said about the W over in Amsterdam. And funny enough, after you mentioned that, I had a little look at their list, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that they use style categories on their wine list. And the wine list's quite extensive. There's a lot of product on there. There's a lot of premium product on there. but they are using style categories. And I think one of the things I mentioned to you when we were talking about doing this was the kind of style categories versus tasting notes. And I think the reason I put it as a versus is actually because I think when we said about, like you said before, about Sauvignon Blancs, okay, this Sauvignon Blanc's really good. And so a lot of venues might have, say, 2 Sauvignon Blancs by the glass. So they've got an entry level one and a more premium one. And if they're, a lot of the time they'd be in the same kind of style category. But then equally, say you've got 2 Sauvignon Blancs in that style category. If you've got something else that's sandwiched between them that no one's ever heard of, that product's going to sell because people they make it kind of successful by association kind of thing. They look at it and they go, right, okay, I know the Sauvignon. And obviously not everyone. You're still going to get those customers who are kind of, I must do Sauvignon. Sauvignon's the one I'm comfortable with, so that's the one I'm going for. But there's loads of people, and I've seen it so many times because I recommend a lot of people to just go to styles. As I say, there's definitely there's a bit of snobbery around it. There's a lot of people who don't like style categories. I think when you get to real fine dining restaurants, they tend to go through country and region, which, to be fair, does make, when you get to massive lists and a lot of these sommelier-led places, it does make sense because it is actually easier to navigate. And again, if you've got a sommelier in charge of it, they're going to direct you most of the time anyway. But obviously, what I'm talking about with this wine list structuring advice is for venues who haven't got sommeliers, basically, and are trying to educate their guests and get them, because what the style categories do is, as I say, I see this all the time. You see the evidence. You can see once you put, so say for example, I've just done a list review a little while back, and there's a style category. It's not a huge list. There's something like 12, 13 wines on the list. And there's one style category that has a Merlot, like a real kind of dry Merlot, and a Barolo. So the Merlot is the cheapest one in this style category. The Barolo is the most expensive in this style category. And right between it is Aglianico, which is from Campania in Italy. And their previous list, they just had it cheapest wine to most expensive wine. So 13 wines, straight line. And this wine, or before we redid the list, this wine wasn't on the list before, but before we redid it, this wine would have sold zero. It just would have sold zero. It would have sat there. It's not cheap. But it's moving since they launched their new list. It's moving brilliantly. And people are ordering it off their own back. And I said to the owner, I said, that's because it's sitting between a Merlot and a Barolo. And it's a really, really interesting wine. But equally, a lot of people can't necessarily pronounce it. So this is, again, when I did training with those guys, and we're talking about pronunciations as well. But the fact that it's sandwiched between the Merlot and the Barolo means it absolutely flies. I mean, the last time I popped in there, they had a party out the back who were absolutely flying through this Aglianico, and it just would not have been selected if not for that restructuring. And I think tasting notes are, so, I mentioned before about linking a product to a dish. So saying, oh, this goes really well with the steak or the lamb or whatever it may be. And I think the problem is that a lot of people put those details in tasting notes, and 99% of people don't read tasting notes at all. So tasting notes just really clutter up your wine list. They so much more writing, so much more sort of energy sapping, really, for guests to navigate. And the amount of wine lists I've seen where you read through and you see, I don't know, underneath a Merlot, for example, there's a Sauvignon Blanc tasting note because someone's copy and pasted on the design, and nobody notices because no one reads it. And it really is. And so for me, this is why I say style categories versus tasting notes, because I think often with tasting notes, well, two things. One, people don't read them, but also I feel like with tasting notes, you have to do it. Or if your supplier is going to help you do it, you have to do it based on what your wine list is, what every product is compared to each other. So generally, if you ask your supplier for tasting notes, they will give you their tasting note off their system, which is fine in a lot of cases. But sometimes that tasting note might mention, I don't know, goes really well with asparagus, and you might not serve asparagus. It might mention 3 wines in a row might have something that says, I don't know, full-bodied and great with beef. And that might happen to fall onto 3 wines in a row on the wine list because they haven't actually seen how it lines up on your list. So I think that's another problem with tasting notes. And I'm not a massive fan of tasting notes because I just don't think people read them. And I think some kind of style category really, really directs people without giving them too much reading to do as well, because people don't want to have to work hard. They're going out for dinner. And this is the reason they end up picking Malbecs, Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs and things, because they know what they're getting. And then they haven't got to waste time. They haven't got to read through a whole list. They haven't got to ask for recommendations. They just go, yeah, bang, that's my banker. That's the one I've got to go for. So,
yeah, I read a book, Building a Brand Story by Donald Miller, and he talks about how you shouldn't make your guests use too many calories or burn too many calories to make a decision, because they'll just go for the easy way out. And if that's buying a product, they'll walk past it, they won't buy it. If that's on a wine list, they won't experiment, they'll go for what they know because it's easier. And that's exactly what you're saying there is, make it super simple for people to make a choice, and then those who want to experiment will, because they feel confident. And I think the other thing as well is I think we have to admit, don't we, in the industry now, we are short-staffed. We do have staff that are inexperienced and we're having to try and train them. People are turning over staff. That fact is true as well. So, you don't necessarily keep these people for very long, depending on what type of business you are. So the more easy you can make for a guest to make their own decision, the more the easier it will be on your team fundamentally.
Absolutely. And that, as I say, that style category thing, honestly, I was saying to the staff, and one of these ones I did the list review at a little while ago and did the training, I said to the guys, listen, these style categories are taking work off your hands. You're still getting this training. You're still going to learn. If someone's going to ask you about the product, you'll know about the product. But the fact that you've not got it just as a straight list of 1 to 13 or whatever now is going to, a lot of people will make their minds. I've seen the sales. I've only did 6 weeks or so. They've had the new list in place, but I've seen the sales and it's clear as day. Certain products are moving because of where they're sitting in these spots. And equally, obviously, the way I'm talking now, I'm talking about guest experience and making it easier for the guest, educating the guest. However, the one thing that the style categories does really well as well is it takes people's mindset off price. Because if your list is cheapest down to most expensive, most people are going to stop at a certain point. Whereas if you get into that category and it's, I don't know, £3 over what someone normally spends on a bottle of wine, but they're kind of, they have that little bit of confidence because they see it alongside those other wines and they'll go, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll try that one. And so obviously we know what it's like when it's the same with food menus, isn't it? Who are just kind of, if it's in price order, then people will just get to a certain point and stop. Whereas I say style categories do, absolutely. They take people's attention off that. So it's not just about, oh, brilliant for your guest experience, making it more simple for them. It's not just about educating them, letting them learn about a new wine. Also, your actual financial bottom line is going to come through and generally get you a better spend out of it.
Just while you're on that one, then, because I'm very data driven. People who follow me on LinkedIn and this show know that. So if I'm in a business right now and I go on and I look and I split all my wines into types. So let's take fruity and bold, for example. If my top selling wines are in the fruity and bold category, is there an argument to say that you now start looking at those categories more strategically and actually going, do you know what? If my cheapest bottle of wine is 45 quid, now I'm going to push the boundaries a little bit to 46, 47, maybe 48, because I know people are going to that category and using it as a way to strategically boost average check. Because I guess that definitely feels like something that could start being something
100%.
you track.
100%. I mean, I'm a big data person as well. I think I mentioned on one of your posts actually on LinkedIn where I said about someone saying to me, "Oh, this Shiraz is a really big seller. We want to delist the Malbec." And I said to him, "Well, should we check the till, check the actual figures to see what sells?" And the Malbec was outselling Shiraz 4-1, and this particular member of staff just randomly seemed to always be selling Shiraz. But I think you're absolutely right, because one thing I'd always say to people is, as I say, when I do these list reviews and stuff, and I will collate all the data and I'll get your average 175 ml glass, 125 ml glass, average bottle spend for each of the different colors of the wine. And what I find really interesting with hospitality is a lot of operators, they know their average spend per head overall. They know their average food spend, but a lot of them don't know their average wine spend, which is really interesting, because I think exactly like you just said then, once you know where your guests are spending, what kind of price point they're spending at, you can definitely very strategically say, like we mentioned earlier, you buy a new wine, is it going to sell itself? And I think what you've got there, you're set up for it. That's given you the knowledge. You can go to a wine tasting or speak to your supplier and say, I'm looking for something this kind of style, would maybe go with this kind of dish, or maybe, like we said, maybe a more premium Sauvignon Blanc or whatever it might be. And this is the price bracket. And I think you're absolutely right, because I think so many people are not studying that data. They're not looking at this analytics, and so they don't actually know where their spend lies. And so they're not able to push those boundaries. They're not able to kind of go, right, okay, we can actually get the spend per head up £1 a glass or whatever it may be, because they're not actually aware where the spend sits. And I think, again, I see lists all the time where you think, I can see just glancing at it. It's not someone I work with, it's just a list I see in a place, and I think, wow, you can see how low the spend is in this place, and it shouldn't be. You can see those products are sitting in the wrong place, and it's bringing those spends right down. But as I think that's the style categories. They're definitely underused, they're underutilized, and they're definitely underutilized in premium venues. And I think because there is definitely a little bit of snobbery towards them. But as I say, for me, what you've just said there is just an excellent follow-up to that point. That it's, as I say, it's not about, and it's great to make the guest experience more comfortable and make them learn. But actually, what you've just said there is an additional string on top of for the earnings, isn't it? And I think that kind of situation is huge. If you can say, right, okay, yeah, the guests are going for that category, so whichever wine we put, I don't know, next to the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, for example, is going to move, and we can put something in there that not only is going to get your spend up, but maybe is a real wine that punches above its weight for the cost price, and you can make more margin on it. It could be something where you taste it and you say, oh, blimey, that's a good wine for that price. I was looking for something for a tenner, but that's £8, but I can sell that as if it's a tenner price because it's that good. And I think at the end of the day, it's not going to cause a problem for any of your guests if the wine genuinely punches well above its weight for that. Because again, like we said before, then you're not being kind of held to ransom by a certain product or a certain producer or something, because you're taking something a little bit more obscure. But exactly like you just referred to, if you put it in that category, it's quite likely to move.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're working with a client right now, and their top selling item, food and beverage, is Whispering Angel.
Right.
We're now looking at the menu revision to be more aligned with the wine than we are the other way around, because it's such a good seller. So we're kind of going, okay, well, if people are coming in and driven by the wine because they like sitting around the swimming pool or wherever it is and drinking the wine, what can we do to promote the food to go with the wine? And I think it's sometimes people always lead with the food, but it isn't always necessarily always the case everywhere. And I think it's just about looking at it strategically and looking at, what's the driver for the guest visit. And back to your point, value for money is, no matter what you charge, the customer's perception of what you give. If you sell an amazing wine and that person thinks it's amazing and goes back to Majestics or goes online and buys a crate for home, you've done your job, haven't you? It's and I think that's what people need to remember.
It's really funny as well, Scott, because actually you'd think we'd rehearse this call, but you mentioning Whispering Angel was a really funny one, because obviously something I was going to talk about was kind of descriptions. So you got kind of like, obviously you got your style categories, but then actually is descriptions. And I think a huge own goal that is on, I'd say, most wine lists, is that talking about making it easy for the guests, help making their experience easier, is that basically in every description of every wine, you should have the key information at the start of the description. And generally, I like to do it in bold as well. If I'm actually laying out a wine list myself and doing the design, I'd put it in bold. So that key information might be generally the grape. So you'd have Malbec, Sauvignon Blanc, whatever it may be, will be in bold, followed by the producer, followed by the region country. However, Whispering Angel is not Whispering Angel alone, but obviously Whispering Angel, Cloudy Bay, and the Grand Marque champagnes, basically. Those kind of products, because obviously hospitality wine sales aren't typically brand driven, they're grape and region driven. Whereas those products we just listed there, they're the kind of products where, so if I said to somebody, oh, make sure your key information is at the front, put Malbec at the front, put Sauvignon Blanc at the front, what they would then do is go away and line up their wine list, and they'd put, for example, they'd take Whispering Angel and they'd put the grape varieties on there, which no one cares about with Whispering Angel. So but I've seen this before, and I've given people advice on it, and they've kind of, sometimes you give people advice and they go off and do it themselves, and you think, well, no, you've not executed it right. You've got to do exactly what I've told you to do. And I think with the Provence Rosé is a really good example, because if you put the grapes at the front of a front of Whispering Angel description, your sales in that place you're talking about, the sales would probably fall off a cliff. Whereas actually you put Whispering Angel Rosé or Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc as that bold bit at the front, and that's what moves it. Whereas I think when you're looking at some of the other things, so obviously it's not always grape. So I mentioned Chablis earlier. So Chablis, I'd put that word Chablis right at the front, or Chablis Premier Cru if it happens to be a Premier Cru, that would be in bold as well. As I say, Malbec. I'd also put, so if it's Rioja, for example, if it's Rioja Reserva, have the Rioja Reserva all in bold. Don't just have Rioja and then Reserva in regular font after that. I think, because again, when we talk about ways of selling a product, when a lot of people don't have that knowledge of wine, words like Grand Reserva, Grand Cru, Reserva, these are things that everybody knows are positive and are premium. People read that word Reserva on a bottle and they go, oh, it's a Reserva. And 99% of people don't know what that means. Obviously, it can mean something totally different if it's in South America or if it's in Spain. But that information, and the amount of times I see people's wine lists and I know that a product is a Reserva or whatever it may be, and they haven't got that on the list. I saw a list the other week where it had a very expensive Gavi, and it said Gavi DOCG. It's very expensive. And I said to the guys, I said, is that a Gavi de Gavi or just a Gavi? And then they went and checked the bottle, and it was a Gavi de Gavi. And I said to them, put Gavi de Gavi on your list. You're going to sell a lot more if you put Gavi de Gavi on your list than just having Gavi on your list. And I think a lot of people get that very wrong in terms of wine list layout. So things like, I say Gavi de Gavi is a classic. You put Gavi, a lot of people think, oh yeah, whatever. Put Gavi de Gavi, all of a sudden it's premium to people. You have Reserva, Grand Reserva, things like that, Grand Cru. You don't miss those details out. I mean, I'd also throw like organic into that mix, because it's a point of differentiation. It's a point of interest. So I think, like, say for example, if you put organic in the bold at the front of the description, that's going to hook a lot of people because it's still in the industry, it's still fairly rare to get kind of organic wines by the glass, or certainly organic specified wines by the glass at good prices that people can list. So I actually think organic is one of those as well. We can put that at the front of a description. And I think the reason I mention descriptions is because, again, I see, because what happens, the problem is essentially with this, you probably know this, but I think for any of your kind of listeners who don't know this, basically, if you ask your supplier to give you descriptions and tasting notes, so you say, like, I mentioned about the tasting notes. The tasting notes might not relate to what's on your menu. They might not relate to the other wines on the list. And that's not the supplier's fault. That's because they have to create a standard description of what that product is, which makes absolute sense. But then with the description, equally, a supplier, your wine merchant, will have to categorize all their stock, typically by grower, by producer. So they will have the producer's name, followed by the grape, followed by something else. So what happens with a lot of venues is they essentially copy and paste that, or obviously in a lot of cases, a supplier will produce a list for a venue. And then what happens is you get that key information pushed back in priority in the description. And therefore, when you get through to the consumer often will miss that key information and not order that wine. And I think, so, I don't know, say for example, so I think a good example of that. So say, for example, if it like, say Auden Hospitality. So Auden Hospitality is the producer. You've got your own Pinot Noir, like New Zealand Pinot Noir. So it'd be like, it would come from the supplier. It might say Auden Hospitality, Marlborough Pinot Noir. That might literally be the description that comes through. If you stick that on the list like that, and the Pinot Noir is not in bold or anything like that, very, very few people will order that. Whereas actually, as an operator, what you want to do is take those descriptions, take that bit of information, that Pinot Noir, push it forward to the front. So then it's Pinot Noir in bold, comma, Auden Hospitality, comma, Marlborough, comma, New Zealand. And that's your description. Then all of a sudden, because let's be honest, when you go to real top-end restaurants and certain people who really know their wine are going to be looking for growers and looking for producers and saying, I know that's a great producer, I know that's a great domain. But 99% of people in 99% of outlets are only going to be looking for that grape or... and you mentioned Whispering Angel and Cloudy Bay and stuff are obviously sort of exception. But what I would say is, as I say, typically, I think if a supplier sends you... obviously the description they'll send you of Whispering Angel will say Whispering Angel Rosé, whereas another Provence Rosé might say Chateau whatever Provence Rosé. So with the other ones where the grower's less known, I would put Provence Rosé at the front in bold, and then comma, then the producer. But I think Whispering Angel is, don't get me wrong, there's some amazing chateau and domains down there in Provence, and some incredible ones that sommeliers know are right up here and real wine fanatics know are right up here in terms of quality, but your everyday consumer still doesn't. So I think, as I say, you've got to build the list for the everyday person that's going to come in there. And most of the time, if you put Provence Rosé in bold, they're going to jump for it. Whereas if it says domain whatever and Provence Rosé is halfway through the description, they will miss that. They easily will miss that, and then it won't sell. And I think, again, pronunciation is a funny one. As I say, I try and help the teams with pronunciation when I do it. But there was a wine, it was a Pinot Noir, funnily enough. I just mentioned about Pinot Noir, but it was a Pinot Noir from Chile, and it was on in a hotel, and it was perfect for their menu, and they'd been trained on it, etc. And it just wasn't really selling. And then I realised that on the list, the Pinot Noir bit was like they hadn't formatted the list right. So, and the name of the grower was very, very hard for English people to pronounce. So guests were scared of it. No one was ordering it. And because Pinot Noir wasn't emphasized enough, no one was picking it out. And I think that's something I'd say for your listeners when you are doing your lists, is that often the supplier, will give you a description kind of the wrong way around, which is no fault of theirs. It's just the way they have to do their stock management. But I think as an actual venue selling to the consumer, you need to juggle it around to get those key information, those bits at the front, as I say, Rioja or Rioja Reserva or Chablis or Malbec or Sauvignon Blanc. Put that at the front, and ideally in bold, because it just makes the guest experience so much easier.
Yeah, some really good takeaways there, and it's been full of great takeaways. We always finish with 3 questions, and there's one special one for you on this one. But if we go with the 2 that we always ask, so what are your values? What are your main values?
Yeah, do you know what? It's a funny one because that's not a question I ever really think about. It's not a question I ever think about. I think. I've already mentioned it a few times early on. Family is a huge value of mine, huge. And I think, but I think crossing over in family and work as well is like positivity, basically, positivity and support and encouragement. I think, these are things that I've always been a glass half full kind of person. I've always been an everything for a reason kind of person. Oh yeah, but that might have happened, but if we'd have done that, who knows? So this is the way kind of thing. It's always been the way I think. And I think, funnily enough, I talk about that kind of positivity and encouragement and support. And I think when I do the training, that's a huge element of it. That kind of just saying to staff, for example, look, the onus isn't on you to know this. The onus is on me to teach you this, and kind of putting them at ease from that point of view. But I definitely think, I think kind of, as I say, it's not really a question I really think of that often, but I definitely think the sort of positivity and that kind of encouragement and support are big ones for me. And they are, as I say, I had to think about it a little bit, but I think that they are definitely just auto auto feelings for me. And there's probably 10 or 20 things I could list that would sound like quite generic work kind of management responses to you. But I think that's probably the most natural one.
For sure, they're brilliant. And then, what advice would you give to an 18-year-old you?
Yeah, you know, again, I would think about this even less. Do you know what? Genuinely, and this is a really, really broad answer, but it would just be pay more attention. And I think that's what so many people would say to an 18-year-old them if they could look back. But I think for me, it's not even, when I say pay attention, it's not even, I wasn't a troublesome kid at school or anything like that. It was just one of those where I look back on a lot of the kind of decisions I was making through education and things like that, and just think to myself, I don't even feel like I was present in those decisions. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I just don't really know where those decisions came from. And I think, again, my wife teaches secondary, and the amount of times she tells me stories about something her kid's done, and I can never criticize when I hear it. I always just think, I get it, because I remember being a teenager, and even when I was 18, I was probably doing stupid stuff like that, making silly decisions and not thinking stuff through, and not really reading what's on an exam paper or whatever it may be. So I think definitely as a general kind of pay attention, pay more attention, really.
Yeah. Mine would be take it all in. I think. I think I've said that before. Is you just kind of go through life, don't you? You don't really take it in, and when you get a bit older, you're like, I wish I'd taken more of it in when I was a bit younger. But yeah, it's a great answer. And then the last one is, I thought there's no point in coming off this without kind of giving some people a few more takeaways. So I did send you the list before of 2 or 3 things just to give you some preparation. So not off the cuff, but I thought it'd be good to go, do you know what? If you were eating these dishes, or we've got one that's about kind of drinks receptions, what would be the best things that you would recommend? Or what is it that you would drink with these things? So we're going to start with my most favorite dish in the whole wide world, which is a roast dinner with a rib of beef. It's what I have every Christmas. Yorkshire puddings included, because you can't have beef without Yorkshire puddings. Tell me what I should be drinking this year.
Well, do you know what? Funnily enough, I mentioned during the chat a minute ago about seeing recommendations for beef and Malbec, and I kind of think, what's the point in that? Funnily enough, something that I'm a huge fan of at the moment, I've had some really great stuff of, is Argentinian Cabernet Franc. Not even specific producer. I've had a few of them, and there's some really, really good stuff coming from some really, really good producers. And I think Cabernet Franc, the sort of origins of Cabernet Franc in France were kind of lighter bodied, still like quite a bit of tannin to them, but fairly light bodied, really. Whereas these Argentinian ones tend to be packing quite a lot of power. And it's funny actually, because a friend of mine, he loves Malbec, funnily enough, exactly what I was talking before. A lot of these blokes just love Malbec. And he sent me a photo of this little haul he bought from supermarket of his kind of Christmas wines. And one of them was what he thought was the Catena Malbec. And then I looked close at the bottles, and then he replied and he said, hang on, I've got the wrong one. That's not the Malbec. And I said, you know what, though? Funnily enough, mate, you will love that wine. And I said, you bought the Cab Franc by accident. I said, I'm a massive fan of Cab Franc. And I think, but exactly what I was just saying to you earlier, the education's not there. So he's picked up the Cab Franc because the Cab Franc and the Malbec label look identical, other than the grape writing in small letters. And I said to him, for me, Scott, I think, I'm a massive fan of what's Argentinian Cab Franc at the moment, because you mentioned about that being your favorite dish. For me, my style of red wine, don't get me wrong, I love Pinot Noir. I really appreciate good Pinot Noir, but I really do like big, bold, fruit-driven reds. And I'm not really a Malbec fan. Not that I dislike Malbec, but kind of because, like I said before, I try and steer clear of drinking the same thing that everyone drinks and try and discover new stuff. And I think, so that's why I don't really tend to drink Malbec that often. But I think, these Cab Francs, I think for that kind of dish, I think you find a pretty good pairing.
It's a good tip. I'm going to check that out. I think I have an Amarone just sitting there nicely, that's been sitting there for a while. So
I'm sure that Amarone is definitely not going to fail you with that, I'm sure.
All right, next one, Dover sole. You can't beat, can you? Grilled Dover sole with some nice brown butter. It's probably like the go-to fish dish in kind of some nice restaurants. So
it's funny actually, because I touched briefly on like Chablis earlier on. I mean something like really, really elegant, unoaked Chardonnay with that dish, I think is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, one thing obviously with Chablis though, depending on price point, if someone wants to pair up, they're not typically, a lot of places aren't going to be in the budget for Chablis by the glass to pair with their Dover Sole these days. So I think if you're going for I think essentially generally I'd say unoaked Chardonnay tend to work really, really well. I mean, you could even sort of go over a little bit to I don't know, maybe like Viogniers and things like that. You get a little bit of that creamy texture, but you get a nice bit of aromatics. But then I'd definitely say the Chardonnay is more of a banker, because with Viogniers you get a lot of different styles. You can get a lot of some that are kind of slightly aromatic and a bit lighter, and you get some that are kind of bit heavier alcohol and full body. So I'd definitely say, ideally, I'd think kind of Chablis or Chablis mold, which is basically unoaked Chardonnay, real elegant unoaked Chardonnay with a nice bit of acidity to it. I think would be, for me, that's the best pairing for that.
Yeah. Do you know, Chablis, I think we had a 2008 Chablis on when we got married.
Oh, nice.
I remember rightly. I can think back that long, but yeah. Chablis, that'd be my go-to on that one as well. And then an Arrabbiata. So I threw this one in there because it's obviously spicy, deep tomato sauce. So which one would you go to on this
it's an interesting one because, funnily enough, I mean, talking about, I like stronger red wines. I mean, one red wine that I really like as a grape, and I often try and kind of steer Malbec fans towards, is Carmenere. And Carmenere has always got a lovely bit of spice to it. However, with the Arrabbiata, I thought again, when it comes to Italy, it tends to be sort of, I just always think Italy in terms of pairings. And I think so something like Primitivo, I think it'd be really, really nice when you get a good Primitivo Manduria or something like that. I think it'd be really nice with that dish because it has got that bit of strength to it, like fairly hot climate down in the south, and I think that'll go nicely. And equally, for anyone who doesn't know, obviously Primitivo and Zinfandel are the same grape. So I think if you get Californian Zinfandel, it tend to have that similar kind of again hot climate. So you get a little bit, you do get a little bit of sort of heat to it, a little bit of spice to it. So I think it's three there really. But I think ideally with Italian food, I think it's nice to put Italian with Italian, and I think something like Primitivo is good. I mean, funny enough, you mentioned Amarone. I mean, Ripasso, I think Ripasso stuff is really, really great as food pairing, because obviously Amarone tends to kind of take itself out of price point for a lot of venues for by the glass and menu pairing, whereas Ripasso, the kind of baby brother, if you like, of Amarone, I think you can get some really, really lovely, because they've got that concentration of fruit from the dried grapes, that will kind of stand up quite nicely to it. So I think quite a few tips there, but I think maybe if you're going for Italy, maybe Ripasso or Primitivo, I'd say.
Good call. And then last one, you're hosting a dinner party and the guests are arriving. What's your choice of arrival drink?
Great question. I mean, funnily enough, having worked in wine all these years, the only thing I want at the beginning of a meal normally is beer. But it's, I think, in terms of if you're going for bubbly, for example, I mean, for me, like I said about Malbec, I've got nothing specific against Prosecco as such, but because I don't just want to drink the same everyone drinks, I never serve someone Prosecco when I come to my house. It's just not something I do. So I think there's some fantastic carvers out there. There's things like Cremons as well. I think Cremon is something that really misses out on the column inches in terms of the marketing. Cremon just kind of falls down that. Carver, there's a lot of great Carver, but Carver's getting a bit more recognition, whereas I think Cremon, you get some really, really great stuff, and I just don't think enough people know about it. Obviously, the English wines are really, really strongly on the scene now. Really, really great stuff, fantastic quality, but the price point tends to be a little bit higher. But I think some of these Cremons, Cremon de Loire, Cremon de Bourgogne, things like that, you can get some really, really impressive sparkling wines if you don't want to go to Champagne. Or if you are going to Champagne, I just always try and say to people, try and find a grower Champagne if you can. So you'll see on the back of the label this tiny, tiny little RM, which will tell you that it's the grower producer. And it's hard to hunt down, and there won't be many in supermarkets, but there was a Sainsbury's a couple of years ago. They seem to have delisted it now, but they had a vintage Blanc de Blanc Premier Cru grower champagne for 25 quid in there. So they did, It was really, really good stuff, a really, really good price. I don't know if they're bringing it back at all. Maybe they kind of haven't got it at the moment because it's probably quite small production, I'd imagine. But if you're going to Champagne, I think the overall understanding of growers and knowledge of growers out in the market is very, very tiny. And I think it's often a nice little story to tell your guests if you're going to have people over and explain to them it's a grower and their total production is 80,000 bottles perhaps rather than 5 million. So I think that's a nice little touch for guests.
Yeah, it's some really good ones there, and the beer one's funny. I always remember we went to Laurent Perrier, and I think we'd done a full day. We'd met in St Pancras in the morning. We got the Eurostar. We were drinking champagne. We went to the vineyards. We were drinking champagne, and we got back, and it was with a really good friend of mine, Richard Lewis, who works for Laurent Perrier. And we got back to the hotel, and we went down to the bar to meet. And he's like, "Right, what does everyone want to drink? Should we get some Laurent Perrier rosé?" I was like, no, I'll just have a beer. It's perfect. So on that great note of we've just done an hour and a half talking about wine and we've both ended on beer. When people want to start making more cash out of their wine list, how do they get hold of you? Because I think you've shown the key takeaways here today that you can have a great influence on a business.
Yeah, I think, I've got obviously my Owen Ward consultancy, which is obviously focused on the list stuff. And then I've launched the specific training brand earlier in the year, which is called Hospavan, so hospitality and wine, which, I didn't actually mention earlier, but one of the other things that I cover that a lot of places seem very short on these days is actual service training, how to open bottles, how to serve bottles, that kind of thing, because again, this is one of these things that people seem to think they train their teams on, but a lot of teams are really, really struggling with confidence on that front, really struggling. And I think when I actually show them how to open the bottle, you can almost see them just like the relief just when they actually see, okay, this is how I do it, because a lot of them haven't been shown. But yeah, so I think so. Yeah, Owen Ward Consultancy is what we're doing my wine list stuff through, and then Hospavan is something I've created this year, which is specifically wine training for hospitality, and as I say, covering everything from it's generally bespoke training as well, so it's pairing people's exact wine to their exact food, teaching staff about USPs, as I say, even back down to kind of pronunciation, and then as I say, the service stuff as well. And as I say, I do think definitely, like we said earlier about the turnover of staff and things like that these days, I think when we talk about senior team not really having time, I think the training people and actually me working with the staff, showing them how to do it, and then giving them having a couple of chances to do it themselves, actually opening stuff without it being in front of a guest, without it being right in at the deep end, I think works really well. So yeah, I think if either coming through Scott at Auden or coming directly to those links, that's the way to find me.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to agree as well that you can come and help Auden with some of our clients as well. So yeah, we'll definitely be making some impact on some people's lists through working with Auden Hospitality as well. So listen, Owen, thank you very much. Genuinely, I'm really looking forward to listening back to this to kind of get the takeaways, because there's been so many. So I really appreciate it, and thanks again.
Lovely. Cheers, Scott. Take care.
You've been listening to Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation one huddle at a time. Hospitality Huddles is brought to you in partnership with Auden Hospitality. Visit the website at www.audenhospitality.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.